From the conversations that I've had with many of you throughout the past months, I know you've been to the internet. I've been to the internet. I've talked to individuals that will talk to me about hydrilla, the experts. I have bugged some of them to the point they probably have my caller ID blocked, just trying to get as much information as we can and to be able to present a final program of attack for you on this particular lake. I want to start with Johnny. He's been one of our veterans. I can tell from the war stories he gives. I'd like to ask Johnny, given really the different types of treatment that we can do with hydrilla, whether it be herbicides, biological, maybe some dredging, and or hydrological activity. Of these various treatments that we have available to us, which ones do you think are the most effective?
Well, a whole lot of it depends on the lake, the depth of the lake, the size of the lake, any other aquatics that might be in with the hydrilla. But the best way, and the way that we went about taking care of DeGray and Ouachita, was to address the problematic areas first. That was areas around boat docks, swimming areas. I don't know if y'all have swimming areas on your lakes here.
We do, on Balboa.
We went after the hydrilla with aquatic herbicide, took care of that, but that's a Band-Aid fix. Eventually, it's going to come back, and it's a continuous process. It's a very expensive process, one that the Corps could not afford.
Oh.
So we had to have something that was sustainable, and in doing so, we looked at the, of course, the carp, and we didn't really want to put carp in as a last resort. We were looking for something that would target only the hydrilla. And in doing some research, we found out that Dr. Grodowitz in Mississippi had done some work with packfly larvae. We went to Lake Louisville, and we looked at their operation there, came back to the lake and revised their operation a little bit to fit our budget. And we were able to get a start. And at the end of the program, we were actually releasing 2 or 3 million larvae at a release site. And what it did, the packfly larva eats the upper 6 to 8 feet. And it got rid of the matted area at the top. The problem that we were having with boating enthusiasts that came out and burned out their lower unit because of the matted hydrilla. And in taking the upper part of it away, we allowed the growth underneath to provide really good fish habitat. It was still hydrilla, but the larva kept it eaten down to the point where you could still fish over the top. You could use water recreation over the top, boating, skiing, and all that without any problem. So it worked out really well. I've had some good stories and bad stories about it because there's always a fisherman that has an idea that that's the best type of aquatic there is because it grows so fast. What they don't see is the long-range effect where it not only grows fast, but it continues to grow. Yeah. And it's the most perfect invasive aquatic plant out there. It can overcome anything man can use against it.
I've heard so much about this particular weed having the ability to essentially change its DNA and fight anything that you may throw at it. In the packfly, are there some in the growth process and incubation of this? Are there some difficulties and how much labor is involved in getting this in the lakes?
It is. It's very labor intensive, mainly because it's like feeding a herd of cattle. Once you get a pond, a research tank growing, those larvae are going to eat what you've got it stocked with, and you've got to go out on the lake. We were hauling 2 to 3 tons a week.
Ooh.
And pitchforking it into the ponds in order to feed the larvae to keep them alive. Now, once they reached a certain density, we were able to take away from that and take that amount of hydrilla back out and inoculate certain areas of the lake. So, yes, it is very labor intensive.
You mentioned carp. Did you use sterile carp, grass variety?
The Game and Fish partnered with us by adding carp along about the time we were putting the larvae in. So they headed up all that. Brett's got all the facts and figures on that. But we were at the point where Rick Stokes was the manager at the time, and he was at a point where he was just tired of scratching his head trying to figure out what was going on, and he was being bombarded with questions from the people that were in the boat docks. They had slips rented, and it's like he told me. He said, "We've got to do something. We've got to show the people that we are trying to do something to correct it," and it did turn out to be very successful. The first thing we heard after we put them in, and they were doing great, and the fishing had improved, and it looked like we had done the right thing, and then the drought hit. Now the drought killed out everything, all the aquatics, and immediately they were up in arms telling us that the pack fly ate all of the good aquatics, native aquatics. We had to do quite a bit of research on that to prove that the pack fly larvae are species-specific feeders. They will only eat hydrilla.
Man, I didn't know
We
that.
tried to starve them into eating Brazilian elodea, and they'd die before they would eat it. Now, that pretty well assures you that they didn't eat all the other plants in the lake, and they did not eat tomato plants that were located 8 or 10 miles from the lake.
So what you're saying is that the fly does turn into, or the larva turns into a fly.
Yes.
But that fly does not fly.
That fly does not fly,
Right.
and it did not fly from DeGray to Lake Ouachita. We brought larvae up here, and we eventually built nursery ponds at Lake Ouachita so that we could also grow them here because it was such a big problem. And when we were in full operation, we had 4 ponds growing these larvae.
Wow.
And we're hauling about 2 tons of hydrilla a week to each one of those ponds.
I think I know where you can get some.
Oh, yeah, well, we got to the point where we didn't have any other place to get any unless we wanted to drag the deep stuff. Oh. But hopefully it will come back. When a drought kills that plant out, it produces a tuber. That is, it's insurance that it's going to maintain the species. You can dredge, you can do whatever you want to try to get rid of it, but that tuber is down there just waiting for the right conditions, and it puts back up. Now, our research showed that in times of drought, the plant will actually put on 10 times more tubers in order to perpetuate the species.
You're scaring me, Johnny.
Well,
Right?
it's the most perfect invasive aquatic that you'll ever have to deal with. I can promise you. We dealt with several different ones, but that one was the one that was really the worst.
We're scheduled to do dredging on Balboa in the next 12 months, let's say, or we're trying to decide, is that a possibility to scrape that sediment out and extract the hydrilla with it?
You'll get some of the tubers, but they're little, about the size of a peanut, and they're in clusters underneath the root system, and it'd be almost impossible to get them all out. Now each one of those tubers is going to produce a new plant. That new plant will grow 1 inch in 24 hours, and every side shoot and every apical stem will also grow 1 inch in 24 hours. It's the fastest growing aquatic out there that we knew of.
I think that there's several here along Balboa that would attest to that very readily from the growth that we've had in ours. Dustin, since you've taken over for Johnny, I understand you came from Lake Millwood. What was your activities there?
At Millwood, because I'd volunteered and worked with Johnny before, I started down there. I knew quite a bit about the Pack Fly project that he'd been working on, and we had a pretty bad hydrilla problem down there as well, so we built a facility down there almost identical to what Johnny had at DeGray and Ouachita, and so we started brooding the larvae down there, and we had our stock built up, ready to make releases for the next year. They go dormant during the winter, so we'd built our stock up, and we're holding on to them because it was too late in the year that year to inoculate the lake. So from that time through the winter, for some reason, we did not have the hydrilla come back that next spring and summer that we did before. The only thing that I could think of was that it was due to a longer winter, and it stayed in the dormant season longer. I don't know. Me and Johnny had kind of talked about that, but long story short, we didn't actually put any in the lake after we had built our stock up.
Wow.
But they do have the facility. It's only a matter of time. It'll be back just like it was before. We had areas of probably 200 acre coves that were like football fields. It was water, and then it looked exactly like a football field.
Wow.
So it's only a matter of time, but they do have the facility ready to go and for whenever they need it.
All right.
Brett, I'll ask you about the carp. We stock carp here. You guys have stocked carp here, and it's been a little while since we've done it. We've stocked about 1,600 carp in Lake Balboa to this point since we found it. How many carp do you think we really need to stock in a lake of that size?
Well, when it comes to debates about numbers of carp to stock in a fishery for controlling vegetation, you can go to the internet, which is a wonderful thing for research and all this, and you'll see those rates vary. And the general consensus is that if you intend to try to control, you don't want to just have an onslaught of grass carp in your lake, you'll typically look at a rate of less than 10 per vegetated acre. Now, not per lake acre, but per vegetated acre. If you want to be more aggressive, you can step that up. As Johnny mentioned, though, even with their pack fly control, they were still interested in providing fish habitat. So they used the pack flies to do control on the upper portions of the hydrilla plants because as a fisheries biologist, we're often asked about aquatic vegetation and are there benefits to it? And you bet there are. And I've been preaching this my whole career. I've just seen too many times. I think we even saw on Balboa on your program, I think everybody probably saw the tremendous number of sunfish species. When you start talking about a predator population, we talk about bass, we talk about crappie. They eat those small brim. That's a lot of their food supply. And if you do have some available habitat and in the form of aquatic vegetation, it does provide a substrate for a lot of aquatic invertebrates, small bugs, if you will, that live amongst that plant community. It can be part of a healthy ecosystem, and a lot of scientific literature actually will say that levels of surface coverage up to 25 or 30% of a water body can be part of a healthy ecosystem. Now, that has to be taken into consideration, of course, here at the village with conflicts with property owner situations. But the grass carp can be a very effective tool for long-term control, and they can also be utilized while pursuing some herbicide work. Most grass carp that will be stocked into a fishery, you can't expect spot control. I know Johnny mentioned inoculations of the pack fly. into specific areas that they identified as being thick coverage. Well, the grass carp are not as well trained, and they're much more mobile than the pack fly. So they're going to go, they may not stay around the area you'd like to see them stay, but then again, they don't leave, they're kind of like me, they don't leave their food supply too far away.
Right. If I know that they've used carp for control in other states. Big thing in Texas, Lake Conroe, they used them there. Is there a detriment to putting too many fish in the lake?
It can be. I mentioned the loss of habitat, the loss of fisheries habitat. That's probably going to be the biggest detriment. And I think you mentioned that while Lake Balboa had pretty extensive coverage of the hydrilla, you got some tremendous water clarities. So a lot of that's probably due to the nutrient that would be coming into the lake being taken up by the plant community. So in the absence of a plant community like that, whatever nutrient that would have been coming into the lake, nitrogen and phosphorus from its watershed, a lot of that nutrient will still be coming into the lake in the absence of the vegetation, and it may turn into plankton blooms, as well as rooted vegetation often helps to solidify substrates. So when you don't have that protection, your sediments are more susceptible to wind action, wind and wave action, and it tends to make for a murkier lake. So you could see a murkier lake, and you could see increased algal blooms, phytoplankton blooms.
Okay, sound good to you? Ms. Leslie?
I did have one other question, kind of compare notes. You said that you started the colony in Millwood with your structure. How long did it take you to go from, we're going to start this program, we're going to build this facility, to the point that you could get larvae into Lake Millwood?
We started, I believe it was maybe late spring. We had the facility done towards the end of the summer, and we filled it up with hydrilla from the lake, so we'd have something for the larvae to eat when we got the larvae in. And we ordered them. It was either from Louisville or Vicksburg, from the research facility.
You got material that was already inoculated, or?
Right. They already have the larvae down there.
Okay.
And so they'll bag up in a trash bag. I don't know, maybe a bushel. I don't know, maybe not that much. It'll fit in an ice chest. They put it in the ice chest, and they overnight it up here, and so we put it in the tank. It took the rest of the summer to get our population up to a density that we could have released, but it was too late. It was going into the winter, so we had to hold them over to the next year. So that's probably what would it'd probably be the case in your situation. If you started a facility right now, you might be able to make a release by the end of the summer.
Okay. And so is temperature a factor in the growth of the larva?
Yeah, the temperature is a big factor. We didn't know that it had an upper limit. We determined the lower limit at 11 degrees Celsius. They go dormant. So when you got tired of feeding them in the early fall or late winter, you just turn the thermostat down inside the houses, and they'd go to sleep.
Oh.
And then when you got ready to get them, build your population up, bring the heat back up, and they would start to reproduce. 35 degrees Celsius is max for them. That's somewhere around 100 degrees Fahrenheit. When the water temperature gets that hot, they die. So in other words, you've got to have something to control the upper limits and something to control the lower limits. You've got to have heat, and we used water chillers to keep the water at a better temperature in July and August when it tended to get too hot. But our construction on our first plant started in 2000, and we released in 2002. That was our first release that we made. And after that, we would do weekly checks on the grids, the We had each one of the ponds were divided into 4 sections, and they were gridded off into 16 compartments. And what you do is you find the density of your pupa, egg, and larvae in a known gram weight. Then you extrapolate that to a kilogram of actual hydrilla. Mm-hmm. And we wouldn't release anything unless it was up to at 750,000 to 1 million. And you would pull from that particular area in the pond and take out a kilogram. And then when you came back, you brought more hydrilla from the lake to fill that cubicle back up. So that's the process of maintaining the population that you have. It's like feeding a herd of cattle. Believe me, they have big appetites.
Speaking of a herd of cattle, do the carp have the same problem with temperature and their feeding process?
No, the Arkansas Game and Fish, the state of Arkansas was, I think, the first to bring this Chinese species native to the Yangtze River to the United States in experimental lab work in the early 60s. And we found out that they have a very broad taste in items that they like to eat, but there are certain plant species that they will not help you with, too. But fortunately, when dealing with hydrilla, it's near the top of their preferred list. So that's a big plus. So it sounds like the villages, they're definitely not new to the game of using grass carp for vegetation control in their lakes. So the village enters this with some experience with grass carp, which can get overzealous.
Yep. Gentlemen, we really appreciate the time and your willingness to come and present your answers to our questions and let the people know what goes on in these different processes. So we'll turn it over to Ms. Mayhood.
Okay, thank you. We've heard a lot of information tonight. We've heard a lot of information tonight. We didn't even know what the word hydrilla meant until a few months ago. And believe me, we talk it daily. Between Bill and Brad and I, and now Leslie, we have daily hydrilla sessions. So we're trying to, we've talked with these gentlemen on the phone, and so we've been working on this. But one thing I haven't heard tonight that hasn't been addressed, and that's, I'm going to ask you, Bill, what are our next steps? How do we take it from here?
Well, I think you've heard the buzzword roundtable discussions. We want to invite the populace, not just Lake Balboa individuals, but property owners throughout the village. We'll put this program together, hopefully within the next week or so, week to 10 days, and get these roundtables started where you can have input into what we are looking at, the pros and cons, talk about what we can do, what affects you in the village. We want to be sure that you understand that whatever we do, it's going to be pointed to all of our lakes, because we do have to protect, and the concern is out there for all of us, that is it going to spread to other lakes? We're going in and out with boats. Boats are coming back from areas that have hydrilla. And we want your input into it. We want you to have really a say-so and understand what we're doing when we start this attack in whatever fashion we finally decide to.
So we'll formulate a plan, come up with whatever it's going to cost, the budget, and go from there.
Yep. Try to put the money together because, as Johnny said, it's labor intensive. We've got to have labor if we go with the pack fly. We want to get a cost-effective solution to this problem, one that doesn't break the bank, so to speak. We know that fish cost $2 a piece. Can they do things in a manner of time that would satisfy you? I'm not totally 100% sure. I think it's going to take anywhere from 12 to 24 months for the fish alone. So we're going to use multiple attack, some that the guys have described today, and try to get this under control. And I do stress control and not eradication. We're going to have this for a while unless we get to one of those periods like Dustin mentioned that nature runs a course, and maybe we do have a year of relief now and then. I don't know yet. We just haven't had enough experience with it.
Okay, thank you. I have one other question. I get a lot of calls and emails, and that is, when are we going to open the boat ramp?
It's closed? Yeah.
I believe so.
I really apologize that we had to do that, but we just felt like it was really something to do to help protect the other lakes. We are doing everything we can and looking at the situation, and we hope that we can get the roundtable started soon enough to come up with a consensus that we get the boat open for this fishing season. And we definitely want to have a summer of play and recreation and fishing on Lake Balboa if at all possible. I'm not going to sit here and make you that promise, but we're going to do everything that we can to make that happen and make your Lake Balboa a prized possession once again.
Okay, so maybe in the next month or so?
I think we could. Seems like possible if we. It's all based on the fact when you look at it and how the current residents that have boats on Balboa are using the boat, and we don't see any real major growth and change. We just have to see what the control would be.
Okay. Thank you.
Could I ask? Would it be okay for me to ask a quick question of the experts that we have here? One, thank you very much for coming here and giving us your expertise. We're going to have the round tables, okay? We need to make sure that we open the boat ramp and get the fishing season started. We need to make absolutely sure, and this is going to come out in the round tables, that the folks that have boats in here and the folks that bring boats in here and are going to go to other lakes, we need to make absolutely sure that they take care, okay, clean the props, do whatever it takes, okay, so we don't spread the hydrilla when we don't want to. But I have a question, and I just want to make sure that we have this kind of like on point here. When we go into the round table, based on your experience, and I've been in the conversations with you, and based on the situation that we have right now in Lake Balboa, okay, and the potential that we could have for the other lakes with this particular situation, based on your experience and what you've done and what you've seen in lakes past, how would you initially go into this control of the hydrilla in Balboa?
Well, as I said before, the problematic areas would be the ones that I would address first with an aquatic herbicide. But, you really need to have some type of sustainable control measures. You're not going to eradicate it. It's just something that'll keep it under control. It's going to have years when it does better than others. But there needs to be some long-range plan for taking care of it, because I promise you're not going to get rid of it. And the only thing you can do is hope to control it, because controlled hydrilla is really good fish habitat. Mm-hmm. Uncontrolled, and, it's a disaster.
Exactly.
And that, you could, someone mentioned building a facility here. You could do that. Doesn't take that long to put the facility together. You could buy a limited number of larvae and grow your own. Within 2 years, with monitoring and all that, a lot of microscope work to go with it, but you can have it where, you could release in a couple of years.
Exactly. And if we had other problems in other lakes, we could use this larva.
Exactly. Yeah.
Take care of that. And I remember talking to you on the phone about that.
Yes, sir.
Yeah. So that's good. Appreciate that. I just wanted to kind of get a baseline for when we start to have these round tables. Then the folks are going to know exactly what the experts have said here tonight, and then we'll go from there. Thank you very much.
Okay, I just have one question. Now, Bill, I just heard you say you hope to have the Balboa ramp open by the summer. I'm looking out here, and I think, how many people fish in February? Anybody fish in February or March? Okay, so I think we have to have a plan that maybe looks a little earlier than summer. Obviously, we have to be cautious. But what would be some of the cautions that you would give people if we go ahead and open that ramp so that we try to control not spreading it?
The primary transfer that we could expect to come out of Balboa from going lake to lake would be the boat, the trailer, your live well, anywhere that you could spread it. We've had some offers from even the Balboa Yacht Club for assistance in the possibility of purchasing a wash system at Lake Balboa. The more we talk about it, it makes sense to have more than one location. But to go from lake to lake safely, I think it's imperative that we get the boats cleaned off before and even after they've been in the lakes, whichever one it may be, so that there isn't a transfer. Some states like Minnesota, Wisconsin, it's almost a necessity, and many times they even assess fines if they find just a straggler piece of unnative weed on your boat. So there's things like that would help. Of course, policing and that expense is another thing that the roundtable could talk about. And I think we can get the boat ramp open for the spring fishing. We're talking about also wanting the guys to get their boats out and play around a little while in the summer. So I want to be sure that those boats can be moved around without getting tangled up in weeds and get their props all plugged up.
Yeah, Leslie, I was going to point out that the Arkansas Game and Fish Commission, as well as the Corps of Engineers, we call these things aquatic hitchhikers. And these little sprigs is what typically gets moved on boats or trailers. And it may not necessarily be the ones you see real readily. So if there's little sprigs of this stuff that get broken by wind action, boating activity, those little sprigs have a tendency to float all over and set up shop in new areas of the lake, another way Hydrilla has of expanding its range. But if anglers I'd hate to see Balboa closed. We've got Hydrilla currently right now all over the northeast side of Lake Ouachita where it has rebounded, and those areas remain accessible for fishermen for the area. So it's up to people to police themselves. You may have to get down after your trailer out. You may have to get down on your knees and look under there and see if you've pinned a sprig of that Hydrilla between your bunk and your boat hull. Look for it. If you see it, launch, get it gone, then take out. But it'll try to find little places to hang on your boat and your trailer.
Good. So we're kind of all in this together then. If we're going to open the ramp, we're going to take care of it. I'm about to turn over or about to go into the session where the members' questions, I'll answer the members' questions, or actually I probably won't because I will know less about it. Did anyone not turn in their questions that wanted to? Okay, I see a few hands in the back. I think I have some board members and others who are going to bring up some questions. We'll get, thank you. Thank you so much. And as you guys know, I won't be able to answer them all, or I guess I could try to if you want to stay here. I'll answer as many as you're willing to listen to, and then we'll answer the rest of them in our email.
We're losing our audience. Losing our audience.
You didn't say my name. Mm-hmm. I thought she said my name.
Wonder where they're going.
Exodus.
Our nerves have run out.
You're right.
I was getting texts during our presentation about.
Well, I turned this off because I didn't know if I was causing the.
No, they had some glitches. But now I was getting texts during it saying,
I think that people can hear.
Yes.
When they actually.
okay.
Let's put it on the wrong.
Okay.
Right.
You're hit, Johnny.
All right. Excellent. Okay. I'm gonna walk over here because I don't think I can keep up with all of these. Some good questions. Okay, here we go. Can residents use their own chemicals to treat hydrilla? Who'd like to take that question?
I'll do it. That's a big negative. We'll put out the chemical if the chemical is the way we decide to go. We'll do that. That way we're certain we get it out at the correct rate. We would hate for someone that really wants to help to do something incorrectly and cause a bigger problem.
Okay. Another question. This is not on hydrilla, but let's go to Cortez for just one moment. What are the POA's plans for additional sediment removal in the coves in Lake Cortez?
Again, I'll answer that as well. We had a contractor that was in with a hydraulic dredger. He removed a lot of material around the boat ramp, and he is coming back. He is gone now. But after he got here, he realized that his machine was much too big to reach some of the areas where owners needed improved access. So he's coming back in February to reach those areas that we've noted as priority. So he is coming back.
Okay. All right, Bill, I'm going to ask you, and probably you and Linda, this question. What are the techniques, procedures, and assets used to enforce local policy and state law on lakes within our boundaries? That one put you on the spot.
Well, we do have our policies. We do have our procedures. We do have our policemen have a boat that they go out on holidays, some heavy weekends. And there again, it is difficult to do that and enforce everything. Now, when people call, the police respond or whatever, and then Brad and his staff are out there. If they see violations, we have some volunteers on committees, but as far as the police being there, the budget hasn't been there. We have the boat that was given to us, thank you, from the Game and Fish.
Yes, thank you.
So it's just a matter of time before we can staff that up and utilize that and be out there on the weekends and when we have the population is out there. But we do have our policies and procedures, and it's like any other city, it is hard. It's hard to enforce that with 10 lakes.
So would you say that our budget constraints make it at times difficult to fully police what we would like to police on our 11 lakes?
Right.
Okay.
And a lot of it at the ramps, it's a volunteer to pay for the use, and so we rely a lot on our members, and if they call us, if there is something that we need to attend to.
So, what are the consequences if somebody breaks a law or violates our policy today? Can we fine them? What do we do?
No, not unless it's a state law. Whoa.
Hot mic there, hot mic.
Not unless it's a state law that's been broken. Our policies and procedures, the most we can do if you were caught or something, we can, according to our declaration, the board can take their privileges away. So that's about.
Okay. So we have some avenues. We don't always use them. We could get a little tougher if we needed to, and as we staff up, or build our volunteer base, we could police a little better. Okay. Bill?
Yes.
The timing of the lake drawdown for Lake Balboa. At one time, we talked about doing it here pretty quickly. Have we kind of shifted gears on that and are now going back to a fall drawdown?
We had a really good discussion about that at our Public Works meeting today, going over the pros and cons. Phil Matone, one of our Public Works Committee members, has a vast experience with Illinois DOTD, and I have my background, and we were looking at the possibility to see, given ideal conditions, can we take a lake down a certain number of feet quickly enough and adequately enough, and then take, I'd have to say it is a risk take, to get that lake refilled. And we're looking at the watershed and the amount of water that we can get in and minimum rainfalls. I'd have to say the chances right now are not the best, but we're still going to look at it in the meantime and have it prepared for the roundtable discussions and bring that in as a factor.
Okay, good. So we have a floating dredge. Will the POA consider using the floating dredge to dredge deeper on Lake Balboa in order to avoid having to draw it down more than 4 feet?
I don't really think we'd have to dredge in the deep areas to get the area that we need to work in. We just need to be able to get to the hydrilla in those coves that have been impacted so vastly, and have really most of our phone calls have come from the westerly side, the coves on that side, but we know that it has spread to a large degree to the east. There's a structure difference in the materials on the east and west side, more slope on the east side, more rock, less nutrients for the hydrilla to grow in, but it seems to be just like grass growing in concrete cracks. It's going to find a way, it's going to find a place, and it'll surprise you. As we said, it's very adaptive, but I think a good dose of carp might take care of the smaller batches, and then we might use concentrated herbicides where necessary.
Okay. So one of my hydrilla experts, question for you. When the hydrilla goes dormant, does it lay at the bottom of the lake or does it break off and float? And should we be able to see the carp feeding on it, or do they feed at the bottom of the plant?
Well, I can answer the part about the feeding, and I'll let maybe Johnny or Dustin take the rest of that. But I've been on the lake and watched grass carp where aquatic vegetation is near the surface with their tail up out of the water in a head-down attitude, grazing, if you will. Johnny's been mentioning carp. They do. They just graze, and they get mouthfuls of this vegetation, and they're effective at eating vegetation because I know most of you in here have looked down a fish's throat. Their gill rakers, the little tough white projections there closest to their mouth at the end of their gills, those gill rakers on a grass carp become what's called their pharyngeal teeth. So those things are modified into grinding surfaces so they can do this with their teeth and grind that vegetation up. But they'll just absolutely feed with their tail out of the water sometimes.
As far as the what the hydrilla does when it goes dormant, it's going to depend on the lake depth. It'll still be a viable stem with leaves down to a certain level. Now the top part will die off from freezing, and it will drop to the bottom. But starting the next year, the areas where it has completely died off, which would be your shallow water areas up near the shoreline, you're going to see it coming back in the form of little sprigs that are being put up from the tubers. One of our initial years of working with it before we ever put a top on our tanks, we filled it up with hydrilla in October, I believe it was, filled all 4 tanks up, and we watched it through the winter. And it got really, really cold that winter. There was a lot of ice freeze on the top of the water froze. And about the time that we hit early spring, it looked like a roll of dead hay had been rolled up in there. We were pretty disappointed at that point because, we were still working on researching the project. And I was about to say, well, we're going to have to find another use for this pond. But about the time the water started warming up, all of the dead hydrilla just kind of went to the bottom as sediment, and was over there during the first few days of warm weather, and it looked like little green emeralds on the bottom of the tank. Every one of those little green spots was a sprig of hydrilla coming back from a tuber. Wow. So, yeah, part of it will die if it's in a part of the lake that's shallow enough.
Back to your comment, I guess earlier about how it's such a hardy plant. It just does anything it can to just keep coming back and keep coming back. Okay. I'm going to shift gears for just a moment, and this question is for either Bill or Brad, whichever one of you want to jump on. This question relates to Lake Coronado. My boat slip is cut into the shore after 10 plus years of silt and leaves. I have 1.5 feet depth when the lake is full. What is my recourse for dredging my slip?
I'll take that. When this is something that we kind of approach most of the time when we do dredging. Owners can get permits to dredge inside of their dock, under their dock. We don't actually, when we lower the lakes to dredge, we don't actually take equipment into boat docks. We try to stay away from them. We'll go around the outsides, but we don't go inside of docks because we don't want to bump something, break something, tear something up, and be responsible for it. So when Lake Coronado is drawn down, you have the option to get a contractor in there to remove that material from inside of that area down to the original lake bottom.
Okay. This will be a softball for you, Brad. You'll like this question. Are there any plans to stock Lake Balboa with smallmouth bass, striper, largemouth bass?
We're not going to stock largemouth bass. I don't plan to. The Game and Fish has actually worked with stocking smallmouth bass and stripers in Lake Ouachita, and they actually, I believe Brett knows a lot more about it than I do, but they've been very effective with the striped bass. I just don't, and I think Brett will agree with this too, I don't think Lake Balboa is big enough to sustain a striper population because stripers use a lot of water. They're an open water predator. And they use a lot of water, and they require deep water and high dissolved oxygen. So I just don't think that stripers will do well, and our water gets so warm in the summertime. I don't think the smallmouth would do well either. So regrettably, I don't think either of those are good options for us.
You think Brad likes fish a little bit?
I'd probably agree with Brad on both of those counts. Initially, if you try to do anything with smallmouth in Lake Balboa, they're going to run the gauntlet with all the largemouth and spotted bass that are already there. It's not as if there's an empty niche waiting to be filled. And striped bass are usually going to do best in a fishery that offers a deep thermal refuge during the summer, which Lake Balboa is not going to offer that.
We oddly enough, we did happen to in the fall. We picked up a 40-pound striper in Lake DeSoto.
Wow.
We think that was probably from one of our local anglers. Thought they caught a fish on Ouachita and figured they were probably going to mount it, and then they got home and called a taxidermist, and they probably turned it loose.
Never mind.
So we found it a few days later. It was a big fish, but they just won't survive in those lakes.
Okay. Time for a couple more questions, or are you ready for me to move on? It's your choice. Who wants more questions? Who wants to go home or to win something? Okay. All right. More questions. One, and so I'll just do two more, and then we'll move on to the win something phase of this. Okay. Why can't we release a minimum of 6,000 carp at the west end of Lake Balboa to try to avoid fish going over the spillway due to the spring rains? Now, I know you guys talked earlier about the appropriate number. Remind me again, was it 10 per...
10 per vegetated acre.
Okay, 10 per vegetated acre. So for us, put that in perspective, Brad. What does that mean?
I'm going to say we probably got 400 vegetated acres, maybe a little bit more. So we're looking at 4,000 fish, 4,500 max. Probably.
Okay. So we know we don't want 6,000, but the other part of this question is, I guess, would it make sense to stock additional fish in order to make up the... Go ahead.
Yeah, I'd like to offer a couple of things there. Grass carp, by their nature for the species, they're native to river systems, so they love flow. And I've heard mention of some leaving the lake, and they are notorious, whether someone stocks them in a small farm pond or in a lake, they're notorious for going out with flow to the point where we often encourage people that put them in a small farm pond to build a barrier or a screen device to try to keep them in the lake. So they have a knack for that. Plus, you got to keep in mind most studies will support what we call natural mortality of these stock fish. You can't just put them in there and assume that they've all lived. And most data will indicate that you'll get anywhere from about a 25 to 35% annual mortality. So what am I saying there? I'm saying if you stocked 1,000 one year, by the next year, you've probably already lost 25 to 30% of those fish.
That makes sense.
And then it compounds the following year. So those are things to keep in consideration when you're. And if carp, if it ever gets to the point where the vegetation's gone and you've stocked too many, you'll know it because you won't see the vegetation, and whoever's mowing those lawn clippings hit the water and they school in there to find that to eat.
They want the
will do it.
vegetation.
They will do it.
Okay. All right. Let me see. I'll end on this one, and I will answer. I think I can answer this one. If budget is an issue, would the POA consider opening up a fund so property owners could contribute money to help clean up the lakes? Of course, there would need to be a published plan, a schedule, and a budget per lake with guarantees and accountability and full disclosure. So there is assurance the money is not utilized for something else. Now, while I cannot talk fish and lakes and hydrilla, I can talk money, and I will say absolutely. We would be happy to set up a specific fund to increase the budget of our lakes. That's the direction that we need to go. We've talked a lot before about appropriate funding for our 26,000 acres, and certainly we know that we're underfunded for our 11 lakes. Okay,